That's what our next guest does every single day by as they used to say in math class, he shows you his work. He tells you what his methodology is, and on a daily basis, we're getting those updated tracking numbers. So we value Mark Mitchell very highly, and we welcome him back to 1210 WPHT and the Matt Rooney Show. Mark, you're a busy man. We really appreciate you making time for us tonight.
No, hey, listen, I'm a numbers nerd, and if anybody wants to talk polling, I'm there.
I never knew, being a future lawyer when I was back at school, that I'd ever like math this much. And I'm not sure, again, polling is maybe a little bit science, a little bit art. I'd be interested to hear your take, but I just obsess over this data now, trying to understand it. And I meant what I just said. One thing that I appreciate about Rasmussen, and I think many people do, is you show your math. We see the daily fluctuations, and occasionally my heart drops because I see Kamala spike, but that makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all just statistics, right? If you sample over and over again, you're going to get a run of things you don't like. You're going to get a run of good things. And it is a close race right now. But what hasn't been changing very much is just the weekly national popular vote lead that Trump has. He's been +2 the last 3 weeks we've put numbers out. And just that alone is just colossally bad news for Kamala Harris. And it's not just us, like everybody else that is pretty respected agrees with us. Trafalgar, I think, had Trump +2. New York Times, Siena has Trump tied. Atlas Intel had Trump +3. And then even Quinnipiac, like the blind squirrel who finds a nut every once in a while, has the race tied. But then, you have your Reuters, Ipsos, Morning Consults, and everybody else that's a three-letter word, CBS, NBC, even Fox, have Harris up quite a bit. And somebody's going to get egg on their face. But, yeah, like what's really been fascinating recently is that a lot of state polling has been dropping. And we put a lot of state polls out just this week. I mean, I put a 100-hour weekend last week putting all these numbers out. And it is like a very razor-thin race in our numbers in the swing states, but I also think for a bunch of reasons that Trump is probably going to outperform that. But basically the bookends are we polled Virginia and we had Trump down 3, and we polled North Carolina and we had Trump up 3, and everything else is basically in the middle of that. But what was fascinating today is that last 2 days Atlas Intel put some swing states out. And we had Trump doing better in the Sun Belt, not as well in the Rust Belt, and theirs were completely opposite. They had Trump doing worse in the Sun Belt and better in the Rust Belt. But the thing is that if you take every single one of our polls and their polls and stack them up, our margins of error overlapped. So you're getting to the point where if you do like an 800 sample state poll with a margin of error ±3, everybody's putting polls out that it's all within the margin of error. Emerson even put a set of swing state polls where almost every single one was an exact tie. And, maybe that's just the way the dice fell, or maybe it was a little bit of a cop-out. But honestly, with Trump +2 nationally, he should be winning quite a few of those swing states, and that's what our polling showed. It showed Pennsylvania tied, but it showed him up +3 in Georgia, which was pretty great, +2 in Arizona, +1 in Nevada, +1 in Michigan, and a tie in Wisconsin. So, again, I think he's going to do better than our results for a ton of reasons. And also, not only that, between now and Election Day, I feel like there's going to be a gut check, because you just have to look at the events that are going to pan out. There's just not that much scheduled that might move the race. And Trump is really out there campaigning a lot. Kamala Harris really kind of isn't. Trump has RFK and J.D. Vance out there and Tulsi Gabbard, and his, he has a lot of substance to his policies, and it's just like the media circus is over, and there's potentially a chance that his numbers improve. And then, of course, we're also on October surprise watch.
Right, which, I mean, clearly a lot of people still have to vote. I wonder sometimes if it matters a little less than it used to, because we're all voting now on a rolling basis. But you mentioned something very interesting a moment ago. You noted that Rasmussen has Trump, your latest numbers, up 2 nationally. but tied in Pennsylvania. Most people would assume that, hey, if Trump actually wins the popular vote, first time that a Republican's done that in 20 years, maybe he's not going to win a landslide in Pennsylvania, but he should be able to win here. What are those reasons you alluded to that you think Trump is likely to outperform your current battleground state polling?
Just from a numbers perspective, in 2020, we think the average of all of our national polling was about 2 points left. And so I took 2 points of Democrat weighting out of the weights, which should correct for that. But we did a little bit of state polling, not too much in last cycle, but what we did was really far left. In the swing states, the average, we were like 6 points to left. And then when I went we did a lot more state polling this time, and I have to do a lot of research and figure out the weightings. And it's not always party weighting. We're looking at region and where people say they live, urban, suburban. And so there was a lot of work I put into that. But at the end of the day, when I say, all right, if we were 6 points left in Pennsylvania because we were overweighted Democrats, I'm not going to take all that slack out. So I really only took about 2/3 of it out, 4-ish points. Because we don't want to overshoot the other way. And then to be honest with you, there's always a little bit of asymmetry in the parties' turnout machines and mechanisms and advertising. And I'm not watching TV in Pennsylvania. It's impossible to know the effect of all the money that's being spent. And so when you see some things like, well, Republicans have a registration advantage or there's like a lot of electricity on the ground, I'm not going to go ahead and bake that into potential shifts the Republicans might get,
right.
But I see a lot of that, right?
As tempting as it would be to have a Scott Pressler factor who was on the show earlier tonight in your polling, it wouldn't be.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it wouldn't be appropriate.
Well, I'm trying to poll on what should be, not what could be, essentially, right? And so I think there's a lot of reasons why it could be better for Trump, especially in Pennsylvania, like the incredible registration, maybe the shy independent Trump voter, the fact that my independents in Pennsylvania actually leaned kind of left, even though the Teamster Union took a hard turn right. I could go over point by point. There's so many of them. The mail-in ballots are decreased, all these different things. But then ultimately there's probably a few scenarios where the Democrats do better as well, and it mostly comes down to electioneering or maybe a shy Harris vote. There could be a shy Harris vote of people who don't want to put the signs out but are just, they really hate Trump.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple, and I think it's very interesting in my neighborhood. I've seen Harris signs, but they're very rarely Harris Waltz signs. Now, I guess one of the easy explanations is that, hey, listen, they kind of put the ticket together a little late, so maybe they're a little behind on sign production. But usually it's about a sub-issue within the campaign. For example, I saw one sign out today, I'm a veteran and I'm not a loser, alluding to that quote that was attributed to Trump and has never been proven. I don't know what that tells you. Maybe that does suggest that there is a shy Harris vote. Certainly, I hope there's not. One thing that I think that's interesting, let's assume for a second these polls are accurate that show a tie. I know Rich Barris, he's been on the show before. He suggested in one of his recent podcasts, he thinks it's a bunch of nonsense. He thinks it's them trying to hedge their bets. But I've also seen in a lot of these same polls that consistently now Donald Trump seems to be getting double-digit support among black voters. He's getting tremendous support from Hispanic voters, the best we've seen in 20 years. Assuming for a second that these polls are somewhat accurate, how do you explain how he's performing nationally at a tie, but still it's a jump ball, not winning these battleground states? Is it, for example, support from white voters that's maybe going stronger for Kamala Harris than one might have otherwise expected it to? Do you have any sense of what we're seeing out there?
I do think first, let me put it this way. Trump is performing better than he ever has, ever in all of our polling. And it's mostly driven by the inexorable march right on all of these traditional demographics. 18 to 39-year-olds are relatively tied. They went to Clinton 30 or 40 points. Hispanic voters, we have them mostly tie, if not up in some of our polling. Same story, just 8 years ago. And right now, on a national level, the black vote's going, 25 to 30% Trump in our polling, and maybe it's not going to be that big, right? I'm not trying to sharpen the pencil to get that demographic right. There's only so much that polling can do. I'm trying to get the top lines right. But even if, I still think we're going to see a 20 to 25% number nationally, you're like, okay, well, the race is still kind of deadlocked. And a lot of that is like everybody's still weighting Democrats at like 2020 turnout levels, and maybe that'll happen and maybe it won't. And then you do have this inflamed white liberal vote that is there, and it might hide in certain sub-demographics. Like there's no crossover advantage period whatsoever for Trump anymore. That disappeared. There was one with Biden where more Democrats would go for Trump than Trump supporters would go for Biden, but now it's equal. And, maybe for like every 2 votes that the Hispanic vote gains, the Biden Harris supporters are gaining a white liberal woman in suburbia. And we did some really fascinating polling, trying to pull the crosstabs up here. But the state poll that we put out, 10 different states, was very rich. It had a lot of issue questions, and people could go and take a look. And one of the ones that, to me, really put its finger on the pulse of exactly what's happening in America. We asked this issue question, and I just pulled up Arizona. It was the first one I could grab. Which issue is the most important one for the next president to solve? Abortion rights, illegal immigration, rising prices, or protecting our democracy? And in Arizona, illegal immigration won 31 points to rising prices, second, 27%, but then protecting our democracy, 23%. But what we also asked in the poll was what cable news source people trusted most, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, or Newsmax. And people who watch MSNBC, 55% of them said protecting our democracy was the number one issue. 30% said abortion. So a combined total of 85% on those two basically core, like Democrat kind of canard issues. It's like a fear issue. It's like Trump is going to take these things away from you. But people who watch Fox News and Newsmax, it's overwhelmingly prices in the border. I mean, Fox News was almost 50% the border and another 32% prices, so 85%. That's kitchen table stuff, right? So Fox News and Newsmax viewers are very much concerned about the things that were taken away from them, border security and prices. And MSNBC watchers, and to a lesser extent CNN watchers, are worried about things that might be taken away from them by Trump, very much a fear signal. So that's what I mean. Like, we're at peak gaslighting media fear, and that's what all of the internals of these crosstabs show. And it's unfortunately still very effective with a large portion of America, but according to our latest numbers, it's only 46% of them. And it's like 48 to 49% for Trump. And again, we might be a point off or two, but everybody that is highly rated seems to agree with us. We put some work out on our Twitter that showed that basically the higher your average polling sample error, the more Democrat-leaning you are. I mean, it's just incredible. Like, there's not supposed to be a bias in the industry, right? One poller might have a little bias this way, another one the other way, but on average, right, it should be on both sides, but it isn't that way. All of the error swings left, and it seems like it's doing it again, and I guess we'll find out. Maybe it's worse than 2020, maybe it's not, but there's just a lot of signs that Trump potentially will overperform like he did in 2016 and 2020.
Well, that last point you made about the difference between different polling outfits and how they perform, I guess it makes sense to me, right? I mean, if you're producing a poll for NBC, you know that your audience skews left. You got to give them what they want. Just like most universities are not going to pay for research that doesn't say that the climate crisis is real and the polar bears are all going to be dead in 10 years. It always seems like that's what it is for me. It's fan service is what we would call it in a different context. But it is in some ways deeply concerning, right? That people are still, you are what you eat. We've kind of balkanized ourselves by gorging ourselves on a certain kind of news, and it completely changes your worldview. And that clearly isn't a great thing. But one of the things I love about your surveys is you dig into some other interesting things that tell us how people vote, or at least maybe tell us something about who they are and how it informs how they vote. You recently polled how people are leaning in this election based upon what pet they have, which is awesome. After the whole cat lady flap with JD Vance, I want to make sure I have these numbers correct. If you're a married male cat owner, Trump +4, which actually surprised me on multiple levels, maybe just because I hate cats. But unmarried male cat owners, Trump +1. Married female cat owners, Trump +3. Unmarried female cat owners, Harris +36. So I guess if nothing else, you kind of sort of proved JD right.
Yeah. So this was crazy. I like to have fun on my Twitter feed. I'm a fun guy. And we poll more than anybody on issues, and we just happen to have this, we're still polling public interest stuff like, do people like chocolate more than vanilla? And we did a set last week on do you have cats or dogs or fish and blah, blah, blah. But it's in the same poll where we ask our matchup numbers, and just so for some experimentation and some fun, I crunched the numbers together. And we're always looking for signal, like where is a bigger signal, and it's in the cat lady vote. And it really, if you're a cat owner, basically it's a wash or maybe a lean Trump, unless you're an unmarried woman cat owner, and then you go to Kamala Harris by 36 points, which was the biggest signal in all the pet ownership. And it's crazy because married women dog owners lean Trump by 17 points, and married men dog owners lean Harris by 12. So it's really funny, like the marriage and pet combination has a pretty big signal, but like 36 points, we're talking 65% Harris, 29% Trump. That's almost as much as party. If you are single and have a cat, you almost vote Harris as much as Democrats do. More than religion, more than education, more than income, more than literally anything else. And it's like all the other cat owners, it doesn't really have an impact. It's only single cat. So there's something going on, and I joked about it. It's probably the Toxoplasma Gandhi vote, but whatever. Pretty crazy. So we're always looking for opportunities to, and we do little polls on our Twitter too. And we found that Harris voters were slightly more accepting of Crocs. And today we found that there actually wasn't a difference between Harris and Trump supporters on whether fake service dog owners were detestable or not. So, to keep the levity.
Now, have you polled Crocs and socks? Because it seems like a lot of young voters are doing that now. One of my nephews wears Crocs and socks, and I looked at him like he had 6 heads, and he said, "No, Uncle Matt, this is like what we do now. This is acceptable."
Oh, that's horrible. I think Crocs are the worst thing on earth. But believe it or not, actually, it was like 58% of Trump supporters said they were Crocs. Now, those were Twitter polls. The pet ones were not. That was actually a scientifically conducted poll. But we were also actually a good conversation on Twitter about the tattoo vote. And believe it or not, the tattoo vote has swung incredibly towards Trump. Back just like 10 years ago, 26% of Democrats had tattoos, but it was only like 14% of Republicans. And now they're basically at parity at about 30%. Pretty incredible. In fact, Republicans with tattoos are 1 point more than Democrats.
And you know what? I mean, we're laughing, and you said you like to have fun, and some people would look at this stuff, Crocs, cats, whatever, as being inconsequential. I think in some ways this is the most important polling there is, because we know that there is a cultural and values divide in this country. The gulf between people that line up on either side, it's seismic, and this stuff helps you understand it, which is why I understand, even though I don't agree with the people that were triggered by J.D. Vance when he said that. My reaction initially was, well, it's true. Even if you happen to be a cat lady, if you're someone who has devoted your life to an animal instead of forming a family, naturally your interests are going to be different than somebody that's got 6 kids and goes to church once a week. The idea that was controversial, it kind of blew my mind.
Well, that's exactly what I'm spending my entire day trying to figure out, is that party used to be the biggest descriptor, and it's not anymore. And ideology is a little bit bigger than party, but the biggest descriptor right now is Biden approval. So basically, almost with 100% certainty, if you tell me you're a Joe Biden strong approver or Joe Biden strong disapprover, I can predict exactly how you're going to answer any issue question. And religion, like you said, is also really high. It's not quite as high as party, but it's getting up there. Atheists break Kamala Harris in one of our polls 83% to 9%, which is almost exactly where Democrats go. And in Pennsylvania, in our swing state poll, evangelicals went for Trump by almost 50 points.
Wow.
So, but there is something, like you said, it's not just religion. There's this values divide, or the way that you perceive reality, or whether you worship authority or are concerned about authority weaponization. And I still haven't found the universal question to really solve that. And I guess we're going to have to keep looking, but if people want to come follow me on Twitter and give suggestions, I'd love to hear it. I don't know what it is. It's probably got to be something subtle where people don't know what they're giving away. Maybe it's about whether or not you believe in the First Amendment. Maybe it's about whether you're trying to learn from somebody you're arguing with or put them in their place. There's something deeper going on, and I'd really like to figure it out.
I can actually answer this question for you because I religiously follow you over on X. It's whether or not you think Rasmussen is accurate or not. If you are accepting of Rasmussen's track record, you line up one way. If you just dislike everything Mark Mitchell says because you don't like the cut of his jib, I think you're on the other side. But listen, that's what happens when you're honest, right? You invoke those kinds of reactions in people. But that's one of the reasons why we enjoy it.
They hate us because they can't shut us up. I think we do a pretty good job from an accuracy perspective. But again, polling, like you said, is an art, not a science, and we're going to get it wrong sometimes. But the real question is, why are we polling on all these topics that everybody else has run from, like election integrity, vaccine safety, weaponization of the criminal justice system, Biden's crimes even? Nobody touched that. Not a single person. They all just hid. None of the journalists went after those topics, and they hate us because of that and want to shut us down. And that's why we have fact checkers whose whole job it is to come after us on Washington Post, and they haven't been successful, and I know it must really make them mad.
Yep, it makes them mad, but it makes us glad, folks. Mark Mitchell from Rasmussen Reports. He's the head pollster at Rasmussen. You can check him out over on X at Mark_R_Mitchell, and you know where to find Rasmussen Reports. You don't have to get any help from me because you're going to be refreshing your pages nonstop over now in the next 36 days because we all want to know what's going to happen. Before we let you go, Mark, really quick, because we're up against it for a break for ads, if you'd rather be Donald Trump today or Kamala Harris, where do you fall in this question in terms of where the current polling is?
I think she needs an act of God right now. Okay. And all we have to do is wait from now to Election Day to see if she gets one.
Perfect way to end the segment because I like that answer. Mark Mitchell, we really appreciate you joining us again here on the Matt Rooney Show. Appreciate it.
All right. Good time. All right.
Be well.